themselves. Our main service offerings are the help desk, which is available to gold subscribers, and training both on-site and planned events that REACH Ready run. Now, moving on to a brief note about REACH Ready and Profusion's relationship. Profusion are an approved service provider of REACH Ready. This means that they've undergone rigorous checks on expertise and the like in order to qualify them for such status, and together with other consultants they form part of our matchmaker service. This service is free of charge and available to subscribers and non-subscribers the same. So a brief outline of today's presentation. I'm joined here by Jeff Legrees from Profusion LLP. He's sat next to me today. He will be outlining safety in the workplace and the procedures and software that facilitate this. I'm also joined by Henry from Holland. He works for Consanta BV, and he'll be giving a live demonstration of such software today. Okay, now I'll pass on to Jeff to begin the next section.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Legrees. As Pete says, I'm one of the presenters this morning, along with Henry. I originally graduated in physics. I've spent most of my working life working with and for the food industry. In my final role, after going back to university to teach, I ran a commercial unit delivering training and consultancy into both corporate and SMEs. I am now a founding partner of Profusion, a consultancy service giving regulatory support to companies particularly wishing to work in China. My business partner was a member of the Advisory Committee for Hazardous Substances, and we have been working with Henry for the last year as an agent for staff and manager. Perhaps Henry would like to just say a few words about himself.
Good morning to all of you. Yeah, welcome to our webinar.
Henry?
Yes, can you hear me? Good morning. My name is Henry Heus. I'm in the Netherlands. Consanta is the owner of Offer Manager. We are responsible for further development and implementation of Stoffer Manager. I work as a technical director, and formerly I worked as a senior consultant at Albuni, that's an occupational health service in the Netherlands. I have a background in toxicology and occupational hygiene, and I've been working for Stoffer Manager from scratch. So Jeff, could you please continue?
Okay, fine. Thank you, Henry. Okay, let's just go back to the background and remind ourselves about why we are concerned about occupational health. These are statistics from the latest report from the Health and Safety Executive. 12,000 deaths from industry-related lung disease. 33,000 reported lung conditions made worse by work. Nearly 500,000 working days lost due to work-related breathing or lung problems. Inhalation of hazardous materials, being powders, being dust, is a serious issue. Although much of today's ill health and death is a result of long-term exposures, there is still a critical need to get it right for today's workers so they not do suffer as their predecessors did. Obviously, we should add skin to that, although the numbers involved are quite relatively small. Okay, let's just think about the regulatory framework, and I think most our attendees today will be aware of that framework. We're governed by two particular items, REACH and the Chemical Agents Directive, CAD. REACH is primarily concerned with manufacturers and distributors of hazardous materials and gives them responsibility to identify risks to human health, downstream users, consumers, and the environment. As part of that, they would develop a safety data sheet working with various exposure scenarios and various manufacturing procedures. REACH requires a quantitative risk assessment. It's primarily at this moment a single substance for registration, but it is informed by the use of downstream users who will often be using mixtures. Chemical Agents Directive, in the UK, is implemented through a COSHH regulation, Control of Substances Hazardous. And it is primarily concerned with downstream users of hazardous materials, manufacturers, and people who are using those materials from other manufacturers in the workplace. And its responsibility to ensure that they are handled safely. Can be single substances and can be mixtures. Both REACH and the Chemical Agents Directive require a risk assessment, and that is key to our discussion this morning. Okay, let's just think about the process. REACH is REACH, the manufacturers, distributors, as register a material, but essentially that produces a safety data sheet. It's about information that is passed down to downstream users who advise the registrants of the particular uses and how that could affect the safety. Distributors pass such information to the next actor in the chain. So all about the movement of information. But let's think that the risk assessment is the prime central point of our process. It can be from the registrant, from the REACH person, which looks at generic uses, what are the risks of the product, how can it be safely handled and used in the workplace and in the environment. Risk assessment is undertaken against a variety of exposure scenarios, which together with identified risk management measures to reduce exposure to below a defined no effect level. This information is transmitted to the downstream user using safety data sheets. Equally well, COSHH and Chemical Agents Directive needs a workplace risk assessment for those handling hazardous materials in the workplace. So we have a movement from the bottom. But essentially these will come together as an understanding of what are the risks and what are the hazards and how can they be controlled, both the generic approach and the specific approach. Let's have a look at what tools are particularly available to undertake that risk assessment. If we start on the left-hand side, in this diagram they've been classified as Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3. And this classification is part of the ETEAM process, which we'll discuss later. With each approach, there is a trade-off between uncertainty and cost. Thus, specific measures such as Tier 3, which will invariably involve measurement, will give reliable estimates of exposure. While as we go to other tiers, other tools, Tier 1, there is greater uncertainty as to the estimate of the exposure provided. And therefore one needs to be more conservative and in the reliance one puts on the estimate. In between we can have tools such as the advanced REACH tool, which give us an intermediate value. European Chemical Agency gives guidance on use of Tier 1 tool. Chapter R.14 regulation, which should be available in order to perform a Tier 1 exposure assessment. These parameters are the physical state, information about fugacity, i.e. dustiness or vapor pressure, concentration, level of containment, presence and efficiency of local exhaust ventilation, duration and description of the process or task to be assessed. There are several Tier 1 tools noted in this guidance and essentially form the basis of the ETEAM project, which was set up to evaluate and compare the tools. ETEAM is the exposure assessment models under REACH. It was funded by Bauer, Budden, I won't say it again, a German institute who are essentially the equivalent to the Health and Safety Executive. It was contracted, work was contracted to the Institute of Occupational Medicine in Edinburgh and the Fraunhofer Institute of Toxicology and Experimental Medicine, two highly reputable agencies. The work was advised by a board consisting of the model developers, EFIC, Kierno Arbor Uni, Cosanta, Bauer, and EBRC. The evaluation required a large amount of data, and so major data providers came from IFA, NIOSH, HSE, UK, and London University. And also as part of the advisory, the European Chemicals Agency was highly involved. ETEAM looked at 5 particular tools, those tools that are identified within the Guidance R.14. These were ECHA targeted risk assessment, 2 versions, version 2 and version 3. Stoffer Manager, version 4.5. Risk of derm, knees, and also within the study, some work was looked at in terms of ease. The ETEAM, it's an extremely large project, looked at the evaluation principles. And the primary evaluation was how it validated against measured data, how each of the models predicted measured data. They also had within a principle of the evaluation was a degree of conservatism. Essentially, did the models predict within the examples, did they have examples where the predicted values were less than the actual measured value? If there were very few, then the model was concerned to be conservative. If there were many where the measured values were exceeded, then there was poor conservatism. The study looked at a range of scenarios identified through the REACH procs. Something like 18 procs were evaluated. A variety of materials, including volatile and non-volatile liquids, dust and powders. It looked at dermal and inhalation. It also considered other sources of errors, that if you have 2 users looking at the same data, will they be able to predict the same response, i.e. between user reliability? Whether the IT tool was easy to use, and whether it built in uncertainty. Validation of the models. Firstly, it was absolutely critical. How well do the models predict measure? In terms of that, the ETEAM assessed and obtained a large range of data from 11 different agencies, resulting in something in excess of 2,000 individual measurements for the non-volatile and volatile liquids, metal abrasion, metal processing, powder handling, etc. In addition, some of the suppliers of data had aggregated data sets, essentially derived from another nearly 1,400 data points. As I said, 18 procs, and the ETEAM involved or recruited 146 assessors to undertake the validation. Okay, this is the sort of data that came out of their study. I've taken ECHA Targeted Risk Assessment version 3, but there are very, very similar diagrams for the processes. In terms of these are for volatile liquids, inhalation, and the majority of the data came from that. We have a line drawn on the curve, on the graphs, which is essentially the predicted values of the from the models. And then on the vertical axis, we have the measured value. And as you see, measured values have considerable scatter, and the line on the whole predicts sort of the median values for that data set. On the right-hand side, we have powder handling, a lot less data. But again, the line demonstrating that the prediction is approaching the median value or just above. Now, what do we mean by conservatism? Or just another point, I think, is to note that the scales are logarithmic. So we're actually covering something like 5 orders of magnitude in terms of inhalation. There are 3 levels of conservatism identified within the ETEAM study. High, where something in less than 10% of the measurement results exceeded the model estimate. I think if you look clearly at the inhalation data, then there are considerably more data that exceeds the model estimate for this particular data set. Medium, where between 11 and 25% of the measured data results exceed the model estimate, and low, where greater than 25% exceed the model estimate. Essentially what that's saying is that if the model predicts a value that is below the measured value, then there is a danger to the worker. Okay, without going into much more detail, I think you'll agree that for this particular set of data, the number of measured values lie above the model estimates. This means the reliance on the model exposure in a significant number of cases. Okay, let's have a look at comparison of 3 tools in using volatile liquids. So from left to right, we have Stoffer Manager, in the middle EMKG, and on the right-hand side, ECHA TRA version 3. Again, we got this, essentially the inhalation data for volatile liquids. So, as we can go through, we'll see that from Stoffer Manager appears to be extremely conservative compared to, say, ECHA TRA. But essentially, make your own mind up. If we go to the data in tabular form, and this is looking at each of the class of exposure and identifies the number of data points. So it's in the models vary from MEES for 60 down to Stoffer Manager 324. Volatile liquids, which is the largest data set, the number for ECHA TRA 1,840, EMKG 1,372, and Stoffer Manager 1854. If we look at it in that data, we then look at the number that exceeds the tool estimates, i.e. the number of measurements that are larger than the estimate of the tool. So focus on volatile liquids. ECHA TRA version 3, 586 measured values exceeded the tool estimate, i.e. 32%. EMKG 70 exceeded the tool estimate, i.e. only 5%. While for Stoffer Manager, the 90 exceeded the tool estimate. And go to powder handling. Again, we've got a relatively large data set. ECHA TRA version 3, 21% exceeded the tool value. For EMKG, 17% exceeded the tool value, and for Stoffer Manager, only 3% exceeded the tool value. Just to note that at the bottom we got Stoffer Manager 75% percentile and Stoffer Manager 90% percentile. Stoffer Manager does have the capability of changing the model estimate and gives estimates for different percentiles. Just remember that the ETEAM study is an independent study. It is, as I said, undertaken by extremely reputable organizations. So what do they say about the models? And I just take from the summary report, the abstract, and it is the only named tool within the abstract. Stoffer Manager appeared to provide the most balanced performance with regard to the level of conservatism and predictive power for volatile liquids and powders. In terms of uncertainty, ECHA, TRA, MEES and Stoffer Manager use conservative modifiers which are expected to show a high tendency to overestimate exposure than to produce underestimate. Again, this importance, overestimate the exposure in the model. In that case, we can be clear and certain that if the model is predicting it is safe, then it will be safe. A couple of other comments from other independent studies, Riedman, Gassick and Vernes, which looked at sensitivity analysis for the man. And a quote from the conclusion: practitioners should consider using Stoffer Manager as their default occupational exposure model since, 1, it provides mean exposure estimates and various confidence intervals in a reasonable range, and it is the most robust model. And then evaluation of multiple users exposure tool, just looking at this tool, variability between users was large, but the model performed well. Okay, I'm going to speak briefly about Stoffer Manager before passing on to my colleague Henry Huyssen. This is the home screen for Stoffer Manager. It is a web-based tool. It's not something where you have a Excel spreadsheet. I've got a few more. Sorry, we need to keep on my screen. Sorry, I went to the changeover too quickly. Okay, in the next slide. Stoffer Manager, in terms of the applicability regime, for volatile liquids, non-volatile liquids and powders, it will undertake the various procedures of moving, stirring, gravitational transfer, spreading, immersion, air dispersion. It's not suitable for gases, it's not suitable for hot working techniques, and it is not suitable for fibers. It is also for abrasion and impact for wood and stone, i.e. again materials that produce powders, suitable. In terms of the algorithms underlying the model, it undertakes a slightly different algorithm for each of the situations, whether they're inhalation, powders, abrasion, liquids, wood, volatile, low volatiles. So each of those has a separate algorithm. Okay, because it's quite a highly developed model, I'll just give you a brief view of how the model works. At the center, obviously, is risk assessment. It can be It can be dermal inhalation, quantitative, according to the worker exposure, occupational limit values, or for REACH. Out of that will become an exposure in milligrams per meter cubed, or a control banding if one's working on a simple system. That risk assessment, we can do an iterative process, we can modify the task, ventilation, materials, etc., until we can get to a safe situation. Information that feeds that comes from activities, locations, components, and products, whether it's a mixture or whether it's single substance. And that information, the management, the safety data sheet, or the model is linked to the GESTES database. One of the key aspects of the model, however, is the ability to record and log activities. Essentially, it becomes a chemical management tool which can currently and retrospectively demonstrate due diligence. Okay, that's enough from me. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague, Henry Huyssen, who will give you a live demonstration. Thank you. Okay, bear with me as we make the transfer to the Netherlands.
Good morning again. I'm hoping that you now can all see my screen. What I will do, I will talk you through the tool to give you a live demonstration. I've just showed you with the information logic. We will move from the management part. We will do some live risk assessments, and at the end I hope that you have seen lots of the functionalities of Stoff Manager. Before we would go into it, I would first like to show you a little bit about the homepage so you can have a look at it later. Please read our background. Jeff already explained to you something about the applicability domain, but there's also lots of information about scientific background, etc. We do have a help desk, so if you have any questions in using the tool, or you have suggestions to improve it, please share that with us. But that's it. I'm now going into the tool. I already logged in. You can see it over here. The tool is currently available in 4 languages. And you can just switch between the languages. I'm now switching to Finnish. I will switch back to English. In this year we will add 4 additional languages. We will add French, Spanish, Polish, so at the end of this year we will have Stoff Manager available in 8 different languages. The main part, if you log in Stoff Manager, then I would advise you to go to the dashboard, because this is the logical flow how you can go through the tool. You start with entering your component data, your product data, you can do your inhalation risk assessment, your dermal risk assessment, your risk assessment on the REACH, and a daily average concentration. And you can also make workplace instruction cards, and you can make reports for your chemical, for your CMR substances. If you see the dashboard, this is the output. This is a kind of management information you can show to your directors at company level, or as a C manager you can share it with other departments. But if you entered all the information, then this is the kind of output. You have your general information, the number of components you enter, the number of CMR products, the percentage of products you've done your risk assessment, etc. So these are key indicators of the information you entered and the output. And then you have these kind of pies. You can switch between the tiles. For example, let's take the control banding part. In this case, you see that 244 risk assessments have been rated by the exposure assessment as a low priority, and 25 risk assessments have been rated as a high priority. This is the qualitative part of the model. This is a prioritization. The most interesting part, and that was also the subject of the ETEAM study Jeff explained to you, is the quantitative part. And this is the output of the quantitative part. Here you see the risk assessment, the RCRs, so the risk characterization ratio for a specific task. So in this case, 38 exposure assessments have a risk RCR above uncontrolled situations. If you then would calculate your daily average concentration, then 25% of your RCRs are above 1, so uncontrolled. And if you would combine different tasks over a day, you can also have your job average. Then in this case, 12 risk assessments are below 1, the RCR, and only 4 are above 1. And for REACH, I've put in 8 different assessments, and all 8 the RCR are above 1. I will show you later on in this live demonstration how I came to this assessment. But this is so the output of your risk assessment. If you move further, these are for the skin assessments. Again, prioritization, and you can move your mouse over, and then you can see the results. So the dashboard is a nice view of showing your the output to your directors or to share with others, and it gives you the natural. As Jeff explained, Stoffmanager is not only an exposure assessment tool. On request of our users, we developed it further into a chemical management tool. So this means that it's moved beyond exposure assessment. For example, let's go to the management part. You can have your locations in. Within Stoffmanager, you can have a whole kind of hierarchy of your company in. If you have a multinational, you can have different countries and different plans. So you can make your Christmas tree of your organization to put in, and then you can rate your exposure assessment or your products. You can link it to the right country, to the right plant, to the right location, etc. So this is managing your location, managing your organization. That's one thing which you can do within Stoffmanager. The other part is that it is multi-user. That's for the premium package. You have your license by 10 users, and you can play with your user rights like in any software. For example, let's take this user. There's no loading. And here you see again the organizational structure, and then you can play with it, that you can see the different workplaces, etc. And you can edit your user rights. So for example here, the filling department, the risk assessment inhalation, this person is able to read, to edit, and to delete. So he can do anything with the risk assessment inhalation. But if you, for example, would have this department only to read, then you just change it. And in this case, this user for the filling department can only read the risk assessment and cannot edit it or delete it. So again, management. What's very important to note that Stoffmanager requires quite some data to make all the calculations running. If you do that manually, that takes a lot of time. So that's why it's possible to import products. You can import your product data and your component data. I'm not going to all the details with it now, but you can select an import file. It's an XML file if you have it on your company database, and then you can import it into Stoffmanager. I see a question showing up, but we will come to the questions at the end, I think. So this is the company information, user management. We talked about import products, notifications. Within the chemical management, our users were asking us if I now make a risk assessment and something changes within my company, either our limit value is changed or we change a process, I would like to have my old risk assessment stored, and I would like to make a new one. But in addition, I also would like to have notifications. For example, I would like to rate risk assessment with CMR substances. I would like to make a new one every year. So you can enter here your how many times a year, or you can enter your timeline, and then here at the bell your notification will show up, and then you know that you have to do your risk assessment again. That's again management. Another thing is that you are able, this is the log file, you are able to, let's take this one. I explained to you if your risk assessment changes or your process within the company changes, you can make different versions of your risk assessment. You can store different versions of your product. But let's take for an example. Here you can read the risk assessment inhalation example has been changed. I can view it, but I would like now to compare it with the previous version. It's inhalation. I can filter here. I can take all kind of filters, switch it off again. Let's see what has been changed. Here you can read it. In the previous version, the location, the risk assessment was made for Cosanta. Now the risk assessment is linked to another location, drum loading. The type of task has not changed, but you see that the general ventilation has changed. So in this case, the working conditions within this company has changed, and you would like to store the old risk assessment, and you would like to make your new risk assessment again. So in this case, you can play with your risk assessment. You can have different versions, and everything is being kept. Let's take this one again. Then you see how it works. Here you see the two different versions of a risk assessment. I could just, if I go to version 1, I have the old one, and now I have version 2, and then I have the new one. We will go later to the risk assessment, to the details, so that you can see how it works. But again, the log file, everything is logged. If you make a new risk assessment, if you make a new product, and you keep the version, everything is logged, so you will always be able to retrieve all data. Okay, let's go back to the dashboard. Risk assessment. Let's start with the components. It starts with data for the components. And we will take an example. I already took an example. Let's take this example, 1-methoxy-2-propanol. So I filtered on it. There are lots of examples in, hundreds, but let's take this one. Then you will see which kind of data Stoff Manager needs to make a risk assessment. Of course, the cost number, if it is a solid and liquid, in this case it should be liquid. We have a live link, no, it's not a live link, we have a link with the gases Stoffdatenbank, the German database, where you can find lots of physical data, but also tox data. If I click on this, then you will have a link to the gases database, and you can see all the data running behind this component. You can also import directly from this database the vapor pressure and molecular weight. The vapor pressure is very important. Without a vapor pressure, the algorithms will not run, and you will not be able to make assessment. And you will need your exposure limit and the type. This is Dutch. This should be TY8, 8 hours. Sorry for that. I will now save it. I will not save it as a new version. I will save it. And these are all the data you need for the components. I will just now switch it off, and you can see there are lots of components in. I can also play with my filters. I can expand the screen so you see now more columns showing up. And if I go to the right, you see the molecular weight, the vapor pressure. So in this case, you are able to play with your screen and to expand or decrease your number of columns. You can play with it. So these are the data we need to keep the tool, to keep the algorithms running for the components. But there's more. We also need data from the products. And in Stoff Manager, product is defined as that can be a multi-component mixture. So in Stoff Manager, and that's a different, I think, but lots of you are able to make your calculations for mixtures, for products containing several components. For example, let's take this one. It's called EcoClean. It's from a Belgian supplier. It's a liquid. And I'll move to this screen, the risk assessment for inhalation. You need the vapor pressure of the product. Here you see the HMP statements. We need this for the hazard classes. This is based on the COSHH. In this case, the hazard class for inhalation was C. And for skin, this is the risk of derm model. The local skin hazard class is D, and it doesn't have any hazard class for skin uptake. And there's no CMAR danger. The P statements, and here you see the composition of the product. In this example, this product contains water is put in. That's not necessary, but it's an example. In this case, you see this product contains 3 different components, and here you see. So these are the data you want to make the tool running for your exposure estimate. So back to the dashboard. So we've entered the component data, we entered the product data, and now we're going to make a risk assessment. Okay, I will take an example. Online training. I will now talk you through a risk assessment, then you see how it works within Stoff Manager. I call it online training. You see the location. Yeah? I've linked this risk assessment to a specific location. What you also can do is that you can enter an expiration date. If you, for example, have an internal procedure within your company that every year you have to do your new risk assessment, you can enter the date, and again, when the date is expired, it will show up here at the bell, and you will have a notification. So in this case, product was with lots of product database, so the product was ethanol. I didn't dilute the product, and now we are entering the questions of the exposure algorithms, and this is the exposure model which was tested in the ETEAM study. Jeff also explained to you or said something about the user variability. And we know also from the ETEAM study that whatever model you take, if as a user you make mistakes in entering the right information or not judging your exposure assessment right, of course then your outcome will be messy. We know exactly where things might go wrong in Stoff Manager, and this question, the type of task, this is a question where users mostly struggle. Because you have to rate your exposure estimation, you have to see your workplace, and to make a good judgment. So I can click on this, and then you get some explanations. But we know that with this question, also give training, and we train a lot on this question with film and pictures, so that you are able to make the right judgment. Okay, so this is the type of task. What is the worker doing? The duration of your task, your frequency. I didn't show you that you can also enter in the management part your predefined exposure scenarios, so that you don't have to go to all the questions over and over again. I've put quite some predefined processes in. I won't show that today. The duration of your task, the frequency, the distance of the task. This is within the working. In the breathing area of a worker. 2 questions if the exposure is in the near field or in the far field. Is personal protective equipment being used? Some question of the workplace, the volume, type of general ventilation. Is it a neat workplace? And have you done everything to control your workplace? Is it proper occupational hygiene management? Is there any local ventilation, control measures at the source, etc. So if you answered all these questions, they're not that many, then the outcome is, for this case it was ethanol. I entered the limit value, it's 260, this is a T by 8 hours. The task concentration is 119, so the RCR for the task is about 0.5, so that's controlled. In this case, the daily concentration, because this task is not being performed 8 hours, is 0.1. So in this case, for this specific scenario, the workplace is safe. And because Stoff Manager is a worst case model, in this case it's a 90 percentile, it's shown here, then it is accepted under REACH and under the Chemical Agents Directive that for this specific situation you don't have to do measurements anymore because it's reasonable, it's a worst case, and the 90 percentile is the task or the daily concentration. That's 10 times lower than your limit value. So this is how your exposure assessment works, and also you see here that there are different versions, but you will have now your output. At the same time, let's go back to, you can also go to the control banning part. Now I will show you again your risk assessment, then you see how it works. Also here you can play with your columns. You can enter different columns. I now added quite some columns. You then see it. Then for example, let's take the example of ethanol again. There's also a control banning part, the prioritization part. Here you see the hazard class of ethanol. In this case it's A. The exposure class is 3, so that's a low risk. It's ethanol, the component. This was a task concentration. The limit value, the RCR for the task. The duration of this task or over a day. The daily concentration, if you take your time weighted average concentration, and then the RCR over the day. I can also now export it to Excel, you only can export to Excel all the columns you see on your screen. So then again, you can play with the screen, and you can play to export only the information you would like to export to Excel. Now let's assume that an exposure, I will click this off. Let's assume that we have an exposure estimation which is not controlled. Then you can play with the model and you go to your control measures. Let's take this one. Acetone no dilution. I don't know what I put in, but I just want to show you how it works. So let's assume this exposure estimation was not controlled. Then you enter the screen. I will delete this now. So if you go to the control measures, you will come in this screen, and then you have a whole list which you can use. So this is scaling on the REACH. In REACH terminology, you would call this scaling. The system is that smart that you can only enter control measures which make sense. For example, in this case, in the exposure estimation, I already added local exhaust ventilation, so that doesn't make sense to play with it because it's already in. So in this case, there are not so many options anymore. So what I could do, I could, for example, say, okay, can this worker work within a cabin? I say yes. Let's see what happens. So if I would change my working conditions and I would let the worker to work in the cabin, before the exposure for acetone was 314. If you put the worker in a cabin, it will be 26. Okay, I will save it as a new scenario. Let's say demo. I know it is saved. And if I now go back to it, then you can see the demo here. You see before taking measures it's 214, after it's 25. So in this case the limit value which shows up, remember this, it's 1210, so it was already controlled, but if you want to improve your situation, you can play with the model and reduce your exposure. So in this way you can use the control module of Stoff Manager to do your scaling. And you could also, if you're for example on the REACH as a downstream user, you will receive an exposure scenario from your supplier and you're not happy with it, you can make your exposure assessment on the Stoffenmanager, and if it's controlled, you can send the exposure information there. You can export it to Excel and send your exposure scenario upstream to your supplier and ask if he will take that into account and make it a safe use in its MSDS. Going back to the dashboard, I showed component data, I showed you the products. We've done a risk assessment for inhalation. I will not show the dermal risk assessment, but let's go to REACH. The difference between REACH worker exposure and the quantitative part on the REACH, because REACH is single component, on the REACH you are able to make your exposure estimations for one single component. So for REACH that makes sense. Under the Chemical Agents Directive it does not make sense, but most of the time, especially downstream users, are working with mixtures, with products, and not with single components. But again, if you want to make your exposure assessment on a REACH, it's single components. Let's take this one as an example, see how it works. Again, the location, I didn't put in an expiration date. You can choose between all the different procs. You can choose which chase it is. Then you have the component. In this case it was saline, it was liquid, I didn't dilute it. And then you will have the same questions you've seen before, because it's the same model, only the output is different. You have questions of the working room. And as a result, and that's the difference, within the REACH model you can choose a percentile. As Jeff showed you in the ETEAM project, you can find all kind of different tables. As a default, both under the Chemical Agents Directive and under REACH, the 90 percentile is accepted. As Jeff showed you in the ETEAM study, I think the Stoffenmanager performed best of all the models. We underestimated a bit the exposure for low volatiles. So if you have, for example, a CMR low volatile, then you could also take the 95 percentile. I will show you now, it is the 90%, that's 376. Now let's take the 95, and of course you will have a higher estimate. So on the REACH you can play with the percentiles, but be careful what you're doing, because you might have to answer some questions from authorities if they show up if you didn't take the 90 percentile as a default. The percentiles. What's also in the REACH, you can export your exposure scenario to COSHH. We are in close contact with ECHA in Helsinki. We know that the COSHH is being updated, and once they updated it, then we will have to change our format, because if I now click on it, then what you'll see, you will here have a special file. That's a special format. It's not an XML, it's a special COSHH format, but you can then upload it to COSHH. And again, once the new format for the new COSHH is out, then we will start cooperating with ECHA to see if he can update our format, so that you will be able to upload your REACH exposure scenario in COSHH. Going back to the dashboard, I showed you the components, I showed you how to enter your product data, the inhalation for your risk assessment, REACH risk assessment, the workplace instruction card. The reason why I would like to show that with you, because it's very popular among our users. At the moment we have two formats in. Let's take an example. We have two formats in. We noticed we got a lot of feedback from our users who were telling us, okay, now I've made my assessment, I'm compliant, but how do I now inform my workers in a very simple way that they know how to work safely when they're using a specific product. So we now have two formats in. This is the most condensed format, and what we're developing right now, and that will be in, I think, the end of April, that there will be a third format, a risk-driven workplace instruction card. For those people who are familiar with REACH, it's a kind of SUMI. The thing about the SUMI in Stoff Manager that we have more detailed information, where we don't, you have. If you entered your exposure information, then you will see back on this new format the information you put in. So you have a safe use, and this safe use will come back on a one-pager, and that can be shared with your workers. So that will be in Stoff Manager at the end of April, a risk-driven workplace instruction card under REACH SUMI, which is a very detailed SUMI. It's a SUMI of your specific workplace, of your specific exposure scenario. Going back to the dashboard. We've seen this, components, we've seen the products, we've seen the inhalation risk assessment, the dermal one I will not show today, risk assessment REACH, daily average, you've seen the outcome of it, the workplace instruction cards, and there are a lot of report functions, but that's more for management of all kind of information. So I think that for a short demonstration, I assume that that's okay for now, and if there are any questions, then we are happy to answer them. And then I think it's wise thing to give the floor back to Jeff and to CAA. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, then they will show up. Thank you. Jeff, can you take over again?
Okay then. Hi everyone. Okay, just really just to we mentioned the ETEAM report, just to say that report is available. It's at the Bauer website. The full URL is there, but just go to bauer.de, choose English, and then search for ETEAM, and it will come up. I'm afraid there are 6 volumes. They can be downloaded as PDFs, and there's a lot of reading, something like 1,200 pages. So enjoy that.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff and Henry, for your very insightful presentations. We've had a few questions come through so far, and we'll address some of those now. So I'm just going to go back to one of the slides that 2 of the questions are in reference to. Okay, so one of the questions that has come in asks whether these figures relate to the United Kingdom or the European.
They relate to the United Kingdom. They're from the Health and Safety Executive Annual Report.
Okay, I think that clears that up quite neatly. And one more specific question on the respiratory figures. Do they also include figures for asbestos?
They do include figures for asbestos. If you go to the detailed report, something like 4,000 deaths were attributable to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, 2,500 to mesothelioma, and another 2,500 to lung cancer from asbestos.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jeff. Now we have 2 more questions that have come in. I believe they're best directed to Henry. So Henry, can the model be further refined by the user adding additional workplace monitoring data?
At the moment, not. No, we have looked at that. Yes, of course, the model could be refined, but then you would have to add a Bayesian statistical model incorporated in it. Well, that's on a long-term research agenda, as I would like to say it. But at the moment, you are not able to improve the model by adding exposure estimate by measurement data. What we do hear back from lots of users, could we not add in Stoff Manager data? And that's more what probably would make users more happy at the moment. That they see Stoff Manager as their chemical management tool and would like to have everything in one tool instead of all kind of different Excels. So that's, yeah, it's on a long-term research again, I think.
I'd just make a comment that if you do have experimental data and you have a model prediction, I think you've got a very useful double approach to any work-based problem.
That's very valid. There's another question that has come in. This is with reference to DNLs and OLs. Under REACH, will you use the derived no effect limit or the occupational exposure limit?
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, under REACH is DNEL, under CAD and COSHH, equivalent in COSHH is worker exposure limit, which is essentially the occupational exposure limit value. Is that correct, Henry?
Yes, that's correct. And for the model estimation, there's no difference. It's only the comparison with either the DNL or the OEL. So that's the choice you have to make as a user. Are you using Stoffmanager under REACH, or are you using it under the Chemical Agents Directive?
Okay, I think we have one final question that's come in, and that is, what are the costs? I believe this is in relation to the Stoffmanager. Henry, would you like to take this one?
Yes, well, Stoffmanager is using a freemium business model, so the development is driven so we have a free basic version that you can have your free account. Then you will not have all the functionalities of the premium version, and there's a limit in the number of risk assessments you can make and the number of products you can enter. So you can just start with it and play with it. And if you're not happy with it, would like to move further, then you may switch to a premium version. And but it's 2,575 euros, 10 users. And if you're, for example, a multinational, it doesn't make any difference for us where your users come from. If it's within one legal entity, you can have all kind of countries, locations, etc. in per 10 users. And for every extra 10, it's 1,025 euros per year.
Okay, thanks Henry for that very thorough breakdown of the costs. I believe that's all the questions answered for today. So I'd like to thank firstly Jeff for his very thorough presentation, and Henry as well. Thank you very much, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Goodbye.